This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
On September 24th, 2003, a crisp autumn Tuesday unfolded in Seoul's affluent Gangnam district. As the area hummed with morning activity, a retired couple, 72-year-old Lee Deok-soo and his 67-year-old wife, Lee Eun-ok, settled into what should have been a very tranquil morning. Lee Deok-soo was a retired professor. He sat reading a book while awaiting the tea his wife was preparing. Suddenly, a man ran into the room, clad in a yellow raincoat, a hammer gripped tightly in his hand. What ensued was an act of unimaginable brutality. The intruder attacked without hesitation, wielding his hammer with lethal intent. The couple's pleas for mercy were ignored as he struck repeatedly, displaying that he had no care for their lives. When police arrived, they encountered a nauseating scene. Blood-stained walls and the lifeless bodies of Mr. and Mrs. E. Their heads bludgeoned beyond recognition. This horrific event was only the first strike of the man who would later be known as the Raincoat Killer. Over the next 10 months, he would claim at least 20 more lives, each murder growing more savage than the last. Welcome to Korean True Crime with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my amazing patrons for making this show possible. You can support Korean True Crime today on Patreon. Link is in the description. You can also join us on Discord for the occasional movie night of films based off of real crimes. Joining our Discord is a great way to connect with the community. If you're interested in merch for the show, we have released a new shirt called God's Wrath. You can find it on my Fourth Wall store. Link is also in the description. Today, I'm wearing my husband's shirt, so it's a little big on me, but this is going to be the cotton men's shirt. You can find this now available on Fourth Wall. I want to acknowledge a main source of research for today's episode. The amazing podcast Dark Side of Seoul covered Yoo Youngchul's crimes in 2021, and their amazingly organized research served as a foundation for my own research for today's episode. Shout out to them for their hard work and thank you for being so thorough. I'll put a link to their episode in my description. Give them a listen. I've been a longtime fan of theirs even before I started my own podcast. Warning: today's episode contains graphic descriptions of violence, animal cruelty, and mentions of sexual assault and child abuse. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Before we dive into the crimes of Yoo Youngchul, one of South Korea's most notorious serial killers, let's go through his life chronologically. That's typically my favorite way to dissect these cases. Yoo Youngchul was born April 18, 1970 in Gochang, Jeollabuk-do, South Korea. He was born a fraternal twin of a sister with 2 older brothers. His father was a Vietnam War vet with alcoholism and anger issues. His mother wasn't really any better, She showed little love to him and his siblings as they struggled to put food on the table and pay the bills. When Youngchul was 7, his father got a divorce and remarried to a woman he'd been cheating on his wife with. Korea at this time was under what is similar to English common law for custody of children. Children were property, and property was given to men. Now, this is an oversimplification of what was actually happening legally, but it was a given that men would get the children. Although, with the mother's history of wanting to get rid of her kids to lessen their financial burden, there might not have been too big of a fight to lose custody of them. Youngchul's father moved the family to Seoul, where they continued to live in a daldongne, or simply a shanty town. But this isn't the slum we picture when we think of Western areas because it isn't a highly dangerous area necessarily. It's rather an area with poorly made housing that was made very quickly. Typically, the houses are built so closely together, it's like they're built on top of one another. For example, one of the most famous of these is Gamcheon Culture Village. It's a gorgeous tourist location in Busan that I was able to visit with some friends a few years ago. This location in particular was built to house refugees during the Korean War. This area has changed to attract tourism, but nonetheless, it's a really good representation of what Youngchul might have lived in. Now he's living with his stepmother, who is just as abusive as his father. Among his siblings, he was the only one who was refusing to call his stepmother mom. And because of this, he would be beaten by both the stepmother and the father. Youngchul often fought with them, and he would cruelly call her derogatory names. It was clear that his parents' divorce was something he blamed on his stepmother. He preferred his mom, according to him. His only escape from this home life was school. So he started pouring himself into art and sports and music specifically. He was quite active as a sprinter, and he also did shot put. When he was 15, his father died in a car accident, which meant him and his siblings were going to move back in with their biological mother. People who knew him as a child said that he was a lot happier after moving back in with his mom. But his mother would say she never felt loved by him. He was extremely cold and emotionless all the time. Despite the fact that he liked school, he was a target for bullies who recognized that he came from a poor family. Kids can be so cruel to one another over social status and class. Korea really isn't unique in this way, but bullying is quite different everywhere you go. As Youngchul entered high school, he found he had a lot of talent for art and singing. He had dreams of becoming a painter and wanted to join an arts high school, but academics and his newly diagnosed color blindness ruined his dreams. So instead, he joined a technology high school where he started to really crave control and power. So he became a class president. He'd go around school catching students smoking in the bathrooms and then beat them up to punish them or make them kneel and hold their hands above their heads like teachers would. Other students feared him because they knew he'd gotten quite strong and he was good at fighting, which he would show off by fighting students who disobeyed the teachers. Outside of school, while shopping with his friends, he was stealing quite often, but it was always like illegal copies of records from the store, which he'd brag that it's not bad because they're the ones making illegal copies. Beyond his hobbies of music and art, he was also really interested in anatomy. He would go out to the rivers and creeks to catch frogs, where he would kill them and then dissect them to learn about their anatomy. He told everyone he was just practicing because one day he wanted to be a doctor. But that dream probably wasn't going to happen because he was struggling to excel in school and his academics were not good. He eventually dropped out of school in his sophomore year of high school. He'd always been looked down on his entire life, and this led to him rebelling quite a bit. Long before he would ever kill anyone, he was racking up an extensive criminal record. He first got in trouble at the age of 18 on August 23, 1988, when he stole money and a guitar from a neighbor's house. He was caught by the police and sent to a juvenile detention center for trespassing and theft. At the age of 21, 3 years later, he was arrested again for theft in April 1991. He had recently met a woman we only know as Miss Wang, who he met through a mutual friend. Miss Wang was working as a masseuse at a massage parlor, which there are many kinds of massage parlors in Korea that offer sex work, and this will become a factor much later in the case. But Miss Wong was not one of those kinds of masseuses. Because he was sweet on Miss Wong, he was hoping for a suspended sentence, probation, so he could be with her. They had just moved in together with her mother. But that June, he was sentenced to a maximum of 10 months in prison. Now, it's been said, but really never confirmed, that at this trial, he ripped off a cross necklace he was wearing and threw it to the ground. He denounced his belief in a higher power because he received a consequence for his actions. This would be an important detail for his future. He was released in late September 1991, where he returned to live with Miss Wong. Their relationship lasted, and they registered their marriage on June 23, 1993, when he was 24 years old. He hadn't given up on his life of crime, however, because on September 16, 1993, he was arrested for theft once again and sentenced to 8 months in prison. This arrest would mean he was exempt from participating in the mandatory military service. They didn't want him. He was officially sentenced in January 1994 and was released on September 22, 1994, almost exactly a year since his previous incarceration. While he was in prison, his wife had been pregnant, and she gave birth to their son on October 26, 1994. I'm making sure to repeat the years and the dates as often as I can because with so many crimes happening, I really want it to be clear the timeline we're following, so I hope that makes it easier for you to follow along. Following the birth of his son, Yoo Youngchul starts working at a wedding store as a photographer. He's trying to make some money to support his new family. But he wasn't really walking the straight and narrow because at night he was going out to illegal brothels and stores that were peddling illegal pornography, but not as a customer, all dressed up in a fake police officer's uniform. He really looked the part too. There's a photo of him that's been taken for his fake police documents, and it's quite convincing. When he was younger, he'd wanted to be a police officer, so in a way, he was trying to live out that fantasy. Being a police officer meant he could control people, and he put a lot of effort into this disguise because he was going to these establishments to extort them for money. He would tell them, if you pay me, I'll look the other way and let you continue to operate. It was also during this time that he was being treated for epilepsy, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy. This is partial epilepsy, where the areas in the brain that involve memory, emotion, and language begin the seizure. This isn't going to be your tonic-clonic seizure where the person is shaking or gets stiff. This kind of seizure presents as sudden, strange sensations, emotions, staring out into space, tics like constant repetitive movements like clicking your tongue or tapping your finger. The recovery period for these seizures can include a lot of disorientation, irritability, or agitation for the person. Their judgment might be clouded like they've been woken from sleepwalking. Some people who have temporal lobe epilepsy experience chronic anxiety, depression, irritability, and on top of that, some anti-seizure medications can cause mood swings, aggressiveness, changes in your personality, delusions, or even feelings of combativeness. My husband had a seizure while we were living in Korea and now will take Keppra, a common seizure medication for the rest of his life. This is an anti-seizure medication that has these kinds of side effects. Thankfully, my husband hasn't had any issues whatsoever, but while being treated for these seizures and tracking them with his doctor, Yoo Youngchul would be at a time of significant ethical drift in his life. All of this is happening while he's going through this moral descent, if you will. He was never really an upstanding citizen, but for the most part, at this point, he still respected life. It was during this time he also experienced the grief of losing a brother to suicide in 1994. None of these things would make him a monster, but we can see the pathways that led him there. He would continue to extort local businesses for about 2 years until he was caught in April 1995 during a police crackdown in the area to clear out brothels and seediness. So at the age of 25, Youngchul was fined 3 million won, or about $3,800 in 1995's currency, which today would be closer to 6,750,000 won, or about $4,800. This fine is for impersonating a police officer, but also because he was selling forgeries of music, which going back, if you recall, stealing illegal copies of records was his first ever crime, so it's come full circle. Now, he wasn't actually sentenced for the impersonation of a police officer because he would actually go on the run for the next 3 years. He couldn't afford to pay that 3 million won fine because the 1997 Asian financial crisis was affecting Korea heavily. Yoo Youngchul wasn't just in poverty. He was reliving his childhood of struggling to get his next meal. Likely, since he had such anger towards the wealthy bullies who made him feel bad for his parents' finances, he didn't want to be that kind of parent himself. But there really was no helping it. Everyone in Korea was struggling financially. On top of his family struggling to make ends meet, he wasn't staying out of trouble because he had taken a liking to this life of crime. It was the only time he felt powerful. So he continued to impersonate a police officer in different parts of the city until on February 13th, 1998, at the age of 28, he was arrested and sentenced to a max of 2 years in prison. He would be released early on May 19th, 1999. 10 months later, on March 15th, 2000, he was arrested yet again for impersonating a police officer. He really never learned his lesson. But this time, there was also another charge. He was caught raping a 15-year-old girl in the back of a car. Sources will say that this 15-year-old girl was working as a sex worker in a brothel, but that does not change the fact that children cannot consent and it was rape. While being arrested, Youngchul fakes a tonic-clonic seizure in the backseat of the police car, so they take him to the hospital. He figured if they took him to the hospital, he might have a chance to escape. Except that doesn't work because the police stayed with him the entire time and he's taken to jail. In the subsequent trial, he was sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison on October 27th, 2000, which is the day after his son's 6th birthday. His wife also filed for divorce during the trial, and they were officially divorced January 2001. Ms. Wong would clarify to reporters in an interview that Youngchul got a lot of information wrong, including dates about their marriage. Their divorce was announced as final the next year, May 2002. But her part was done long before that. She was asked about how their marriage was, considering how he would be in the future, and surprisingly, she stated that he was always nice to her and their son, but it wasn't great being married to him. He was an ex-convict who was constantly getting in trouble, which carried a lot of stigma. It was going to ruin their son's life. She said she didn't want to live with a husband that was in prison more than he was at home. That was her breaking point. Divorce is really not an easy choice, especially if you're living in a patriarchal country in the year 2000 as a single mom. So for her to get a divorce is really big, and I hope she had a support system. By this point in Yoo Youngchul's life, he had served a total of 7 years in prison, committed 14 thefts, impersonated an officer twice, or at least got caught for it twice, and raped a child. He had gotten divorced and lost custody of his son as well. While serving his most recent stint in prison, he had started to create a manifesto of sorts. He was ruminating on all of the bad that had ever happened in his life. He blamed his wife, the world, the rich, anyone who had ever wronged him. Specifically, he was taking inspiration from Chung Do-young, who we will cover in a bonus episode for Patreon in the future. Because it's a shorter story, but it's interesting nonetheless. Essentially, he was another killer who would go on to target the wealthy, as Yoo Youngchul was now plotting to do in his prison cell. Youngchul was thinking of every last detail of the crimes he would commit. Nothing would go unplanned. He had nothing but time on his hands in prison, so he started etching notes into his cell wall. He would purchase gloves, a pocket knife, a black shoulder bag, a hammer, just like his father used to use. To be more descriptive, it was less of a hammer and more of a mallet, like one that could be used for metalworking, like a sledgehammer. It would weigh close to 9 pounds or 4 kilograms, and the tip was painted red. He would go on to steal this mallet from a construction site near his home once he was out of prison. He planned to disguise himself as a simple robber, someone targeting wealthy people, disguising his crimes as robbery turned murder. He started thinking about who he would target specifically. There were certain criteria he wanted to look for. First, he wanted to kill his wife and son, his 6-year-old son, mind you. But he decided it would be better to kill people who lived near churches, believing they were safe because they were protected by their God. Then he decided, no. only wealthy people who live near churches. They're marred by their greed, and therefore God won't favor them regardless of their proximity to a church. Finally, the day came. Youngchul was released from prison with all of his pent-up anger. September 11th, 2003. He was a free man once again after 3.5 years, but he had nowhere to go. He had no money, no property, no job. He wasn't skilled in a career or trade, nobody waiting for him. But his mother agreed to let him stay with her. Much later, when his mother agreed to be interviewed briefly about her son, she would say she hesitated to let him stay with her because they rarely spoke on the phone in his adult life because her son was just so cold and emotionless towards her. It never really felt like familial love. The first thing Yoo Youngchul wanted to do after getting out of prison was see his ex-wife, Miss Wang. He wanted to see her one last time, which he would use their meeting to kill her and their son. When he contacted her, she agreed to let him see his son one last time before they left his life forever. But when he showed up and saw his son once again, he couldn't do it. He realized his son wasn't the source of his anger. His anger towards his ex-wife was still there, but he couldn't follow through. He didn't have the drive to kill her, the drive that he did for the people he planned out on his prison walls. I wonder why he changed his mind so suddenly. Because as you'll see, his respect for others will continue to descend into complete apathy. So his next move would be to perfect his methods by practicing his stabbing with the sharp pocket knife and swing with the mallet. He didn't want to be in front of his first victim and be unable to kill them quickly, have them scream out for help, and survive. I want to note that while a lot of discussions around Yoo Youngchul paint him as this calculated, organized, intelligent killer that descended into madness, this is the image he desperately was trying to convey and make people believe. In reality, he was immature and crude. He had made sure to get a phone number ending in 1818, which 18 in Korean Sino numbers is shipar, which sounds like shibar, which is one of the most common curse words in the Korean language. It can be compared to fuck in English. It also has similar roots to the English term fuck because it comes from the verb ship하다, which means to have sex. Although this word is not used any longer, it's quite archaic, like how we don't use rock and roll to refer to sex anymore. So Yoo Youngchul was out. He was hell-bent on retribution against the wealthy, the religious, women, anyone who wronged him. So as he's trying to perfect his methods, he's going out and getting dogs. I'm not sure where from, if they were strays, if he got them from farms or what. But he took the dogs to a remote area in the woods one last time and practiced how he would kill. At first, he thought he would just stab his victims, but the dogs yelped and moved too much after he stabbed them. He knew that this would get him caught. People would scream for help, they'd fight back, neighbors might call the police, so he switched to only using the mallet, going straight for the head, single blow. And he learned he could kill in one strike to the head. He felt pretty confident that this is how he would effectively kill quickly. I find this part of his life incredibly important to predicting his loss of humanity in the future. He is explicitly killing animals to practice killing humans, and is also likely practicing to see if he can follow through with killing someone, thinking, if I can kill an animal, I can kill a human. But this isn't something just anyone could do. I will speak for the both of us, you and I, because we probably wouldn't think to hurt an animal ever. I would rather put myself in danger to save an animal, frankly. I bring this up because violence graduation theory informs us that violence towards animals is a precursor to violence towards people. For example, in 2016, a study found that 36% of violent offenders in the study had a history of animal abuse, whereas 0% of non-violent offenders did. This is the time that he had decided to modify the mallet he had stolen from the construction site. The metal sledgehammer-type mallet had a very long handle. This is way too long to carry around stealthily, and he really wanted to swing it more effectively. So he broke off the handle and attached a short 5-inch or so handle for easier maneuverability. And after he killed his final stray dog, he decided he was ready. He used animal cruelty as a stepping stone for future violence. So keep in mind, his first murder was not when he became irredeemable. He was slaughtering dogs in the woods, and he'd raped a 15-year-old girl by now. He was already wretched and irredeemable, and at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, September 24th, 2003, he made his way to Gangnam, Seoul, the epicenter of opulence in South Korea. If you want to find wealthy people, go to Gangnam. And that's why he started there. Particularly, he had decided to find wealthy people who lived close to churches. He spent time stalking the streets near a church, waiting to see who lived in the nearby homes. He was realistic about who he could kill, though. He wanted older people, more frail people, women, homes where adult men were away at work, homes that had luxurious lives he could never achieve. He finally chose the home. He saw that only 2 elderly people lived in the home. It fit what he wanted. And they lived right next door to Somang Church. They had a beautiful garden, a home bigger than most people in Korea could ever dream to live in. He put on a pair of suede gloves, approached the side fence to their home, and jumped over. He was hidden from the street by their fence and could quietly observe the people inside from their garden. He waited for a few minutes after determining where the 2 inhabitants were located in the home. 72-year-old Lee Deok-soo, a professor emeritus at Sukmyung Women's University, was sitting in his living room. His wife, 67-year-old Lee Eun-ok, was nearby, bringing tea. He approached the front door to the home, switched to a pair of latex-coated work gloves, and took out his pocket knife. He wedged the knife in the door and forced it open quietly. First, he wanted to confirm that there really was no one else in the home. So he quickly made his way upstairs to the second floor and just peeked inside each room. Then he returned downstairs and burst into the living room, pointing the knife out at them. Mr. E stood up to confront Youngchul, but Youngchul shouted for him to sit down. Mr. E is panicking. He doesn't comply fast enough, so Youngchul stabbed him in the neck. He collapsed on the floor in the middle of the room. Mrs. E is frozen in terror. She's about to scream, but she starts pleading for her life instead. She starts listing off all of the locations of money, jewelry, valuables in the home. Of course, Youngchul wants it to appear like he's a robber, but he isn't actually interested in their wealth. She reaches into a nearby closet and takes out money and tries to hand it to him. But this insults Youngchul even further. She's showing off how wealthy she is. He asks, "Do you think I'm doing this for money?" and grabs his modified mallet. All it takes is one hit to the head, and she's on the ground. But he strikes her in the head 2 more times. Then he turns to Mr. E, who is bleeding out on the floor, but still alive. He raises the sledgehammer and brings it down on his head 5 times. Once he's satisfied, he wipes down the surfaces that he touched, despite the fact that he's wearing gloves, then calmly locks the front door and leaves out the main gate, acting like nothing ever happened. But a few minutes after leaving, and going through the murder again in his head now that the adrenaline has worn off, he realizes, oh shit, he'd left his knife in the living room, the knife he planned to commit all of his murders with. So he quickly made his way back to the home and had to break off the front door handle just to get inside again. Because of this, he decided to make it look even more like a robbery. He starts rummaging through drawers, upturning the closet, scattering their belongings around the house. But still, he didn't take anything from the home. When the police arrived, there wasn't much evidence for them to work with. But Youngchul hadn't anticipated that they would be able to lift his shoe prints. See, in Korean homes, like many homes around the world, you don't wear outdoor shoes inside. It tracks everything you've stepped on onto clean floors. It's dirty. When your floors are heated, you tend to sit on the floor a lot more, or even sleep on the floor, which means you want your floors to be clean. So the shoe prints were quite obvious. For 2 weeks, Yoo Youngchul searched for another target. He didn't stay in the same area because the police were all over Shinsadong, which is the neighborhood that Mr. E and Mrs. E lived in. So he started searching the Gugi neighborhood of the Jongno district in Seoul, which is still within Gangnam. It's a very wealthy area. He found a few homes that were near Yeonggwang Church that seemed promising. He settled on a brick home with a lot of privacy from the trees in their front yard. It had a large main gate and 2 stories. Again, he watched the home in the morning, and about 10:40 a.m. on October 9th, 2003, he decided to make his move. He repeated all of the steps from the Shinsa neighborhood home and wore his suede gloves, climbed over the side of their fence, From the garden, he watched their movements from the windows. The home belonged to the Go family, which may be confusing once I list off all their names, but keep in mind only the husband and son have the last name Go because women don't change their family name when they get married. Mr. Go, the homeowner, isn't home at this time. His mother, 85-year-old Grandma Kang Eun-sun, is on the first floor using the bathroom. Upstairs, Mr. Go's wife, 60-year-old Lee Suk-jin, is with her son, 35-year-old Go Jin-soo. But Youngchul doesn't know about the son when he forces open the front door and confronts Grandma Kang as she exits the bathroom. He swings the mallet and strikes her in the head, stabs her, and then strikes her in the head again as she's on the floor outside of the bathroom. He sets the mallet down in his black shoulder bag, takes out the knife again, because he's realized the knife is a lot more useful when threatening people to stay silent. He can hear movement upstairs and waits as Mrs. E runs downstairs to see what's happened. Before she can scream, he demands she sit down on the couch and tell him who else is in the home. She lies and says her husband is upstairs with her son. Youngchul knows that Mr. Ko is not home. He watched him leave for work that morning, but he doesn't say this. He tells her to bow down, likely so that she's in an execution-style pose so he can strike her in the back of the head, but she doesn't. So he kicks her in the stomach and then swings the mallet down on the back of her head. It kills her immediately. The son, Go Jin-soo, comes downstairs, confused about what's happening. Jin-soo was an autistic man who received full-time care from his mother and grandmother. He starts panicking when Youngchul holds out the knife to his throat and forces him back upstairs. Youngchul demands that Jin-soo kneel down in the hallway, but Jin-soo is freaking out after seeing his grandmother and mother murdered downstairs. Youngchul has no patience and strikes him in the head with the mallet, then continues to strike him over and over. And as the police described, his brains were everywhere. As you'll come to learn, Youngchul was much more violent with men. I wonder if that's a reflection of the fact that he hated his father much more than his indifference towards his own mom. It's been suggested that the overkill of violence he committed to male victims was a self-reflection of his fear of being a victim himself of his father. Given that his father used a hammer himself when abusing Youngchul, it makes sense. After killing the 3 family members, he does a check of the home, staging it again to look like a robbery. He's rifling through valuables and scattering their purses and money. Again, he doesn't take anything. I think it's a really interesting choice because it's glaringly obvious that nothing had been taken. There's cold hard cash in plain sight. This immediately stuck out to the police that it wasn't a simple robbery. And again, at this crime scene, the police found shoe prints. They wouldn't tell the public that they belonged to the same shoe, same size as the previous murder. But the media was already connecting the dots between the Shinsa murder and the Gugi murder. But the police were trying to keep panic in check by dissuading the rumors. As we all know, people love to follow murder stories in the news in real time. A lot of us have a morbid curiosity that draws us to the panic of wanting to know more. The news outlets harp on that curiosity, so the 2 murders were being broadcasted everywhere. Despite the heat on the case, Yoo Youngchul didn't think that they were on his tracks, so he didn't wait long before he found the next target. He moved to a neighborhood in Gangnam called Samsung, which is not affiliated with the electronics company. The home was near Haengbok Church, or Happiness Church. This is a week after the Gugi murder, on October 16, 2003. He again puts on his suede gloves, hops the fence into the garden, and watches the home to figure out where everyone is. This time, he starts a little bit later in the day, at 12:30 p.m., midday. This home belonged to Mrs. Yoo Jun-hee and her husband, who was not home at the time. Yoo Jun-hee, a 60-year-old woman, was working on the first floor when Youngchul came in through the front door, brandishing the knife. He asked her if anyone else was in the home, and she answered honestly, no. He grabbed her and held her at knife point and dragged her through the living room, into the bedroom, then into the bathroom, where he struck her with the mallet once, knocking her to the floor. He then fled the house quickly, which, much later, during a more thorough investigation, the police would note that this murder was very rushed compared to all of the others. Perhaps he thought he heard someone coming to the home. Maybe someone had actually knocked on the door and it startled him. This crime scene isn't even upturned. He didn't have time to make it look like a robbery. But when he fled, he wasn't aware that Mrs. Yoo was still alive, just barely. At 1:30 p.m., her son arrived at the house and found his mother bleeding out on the bathroom floor. He called an ambulance and she was rushed to the Samsung Medical Center. But unfortunately, a half hour later, she died from her head trauma. Following Mrs. Yoo's murder, everyone is covering the case. It's everywhere. The media is criticizing the police for not calling this what it is. They have an active serial killer. The police are denying that any of the murders are connected. The first murder had a stabbing. The blunt force trauma is different in all the cases. But Youngchul was always using the same weapons. They're lying to the public. The police are just trying to not have the public panic. But the media and the public, they aren't stupid. They pieced together that the motive was simply that the killer was targeting elderly people in Gangnam. The police knew that it was the same perpetrator. They had 3 sets of shoe prints from each of the crime scenes from the same shoes. They didn't reveal this detail to the public yet. With more attention being on the case, Youngchul had to be careful about where he stalked the streets in wealthy neighborhoods. Strangers in your neighborhood stick out a bit more after you hear about a killer being on the loose. So a month passes and people are dissecting the case, trying to figure out how to keep themselves safe. But Youngchul isn't ready to quit yet. He continues his MO of searching in broad daylight. I wonder if he chose to commit his crimes during the day not only because less people are home, but how aware are you of sounds coming from your neighbor's house during the day versus night? I know I'm a lot more paranoid of cars idling outside my house, people going on walks, loud bangs at night. During the day, I think I barely notice, but maybe that's just me. Yoo Youngchul goes to a home in Haewa neighborhood of Jongno, near the Haewa Cathedral. He puts on his suede gloves, and instead of climbing the fence, this time he has to climb up a pipe alongside the concrete fence because this home around the perimeter has metal spikes to prevent stray cats or owls. Once he uses his knife to open the front door, he quietly starts the search on the second floor. On the second floor, he finds 53-year-old Bae Ji-hye, not the homeowner, but a housekeeper. Using his knife, he threatens her to stay quiet and asks if anyone else is in the home. She tells him that 87-year-old Kim Jun-seok is in the main bedroom and leads Youngchul to the room. Mr. Kim is laying on the bed, playing with his great-grandson, a newborn baby. As Mr. Kim tries to get up off the bed, Youngchul strikes him with the mallet. Miss Bae grabs the baby quickly, but Youngchul takes the child away from her. He moves to the living room and sets the baby down on the couch safely, wraps it in a blanket covering its face, likely trying to suffocate the child. Criminal analysts believe that he did this because he feared that killing a baby would in turn hurt his own son. While he wrapped the baby tightly enough to suffocate it, this may not have been the purpose of wrapping it. He didn't want anyone to hear the child's cries. It's thought that he didn't want the child to die. I don't say this to humanize him, but to convey that he had a very diluted view of reality. He left the living room and returned to Miss Bae, where he struck her in the head, killing her with no mercy. He started to stage the home as if it were a robbery again, just like the others. There was a safe on the second floor that he wanted to open, but while trying to open it with a pair of shears that he found, he cut his knuckles, leading to him bleeding on the safe and the floor. He panicked. He couldn't leave DNA evidence at the crime scene. He hadn't planned for this happening, so he made the split decision to set the home on fire. Burn it all. He gathered newspapers and clothes and put them near Miss Bae's body. He set them on fire and ran outside to watch. He didn't have a lot of experience with fires. He didn't have an arson phase in his childhood, so the fire didn't spread very quickly. The fire was mostly being contained to the first floor, mainly the kitchen and the adjacent bedroom. He stayed and watched because he was frozen in panic. This was not his plan. After a few minutes, he left down the alley, unaware that he was caught on CCTV walking away from the crime scene. Unfortunately, he was only seen from behind on the cameras, meaning they didn't know his face. The police saw as he calmly walked away, like a normal pedestrian, wearing a sweater he'd stolen from the home to hide the blood on his clothes. Comparing him to surrounding items, they determined he was 168 centimeters tall, or 5'5". The firefighters arrived on the scene to put out the fire that had now consumed most of the first floor. But thankfully, the living room had not taken much damage, and the blanket that was wrapped tightly around the baby's face saved its life. Because of that blanket, the baby didn't inhale too much smoke, and it survived. As the police pieced together what little evidence they had to go off of, they were able to get a more detailed shoe print from this crime scene and determine the type of shoe Youngchul was wearing. It was a Kumkang brand shoe in the style buffalo. They started creating flyers to post and hand out around the city. They were looking for a man in his 20s or 30s, 5'5", wearing Kumkang buffalo shoes, which are just like a leather boot, like a Doc Marten. Using this information, more than 100,000 flyers were handed out in the city. Yoo Youngchul had to lay low. He didn't have a choice now. He'd messed up, walked past the street camera. This really interrupted his plans drastically. He didn't want to stop, but he knew he had to wait because people were now on the lookout for anyone matching his description. During the time of the murders, he had moved out of his mother's home pretty early on and had moved into a goshewon in Shinsu, Mapo, Seoul. Mapo is a pretty famous area in Korea. You might have heard of the neighborhood Hongdae, where a lot of late-night bars and restaurants are. As well, a goshewon is an apartment that is quite literally a closet-sized studio apartment. They make my old college dorm look like a mansion. They're common near colleges and places a lot of young people work because they're cheap. But you're also living with a toilet less than 2 feet from your bed. While living in the Shinsu area, he was continuing to impersonate police officers. He even made a fake police ID with the name Che In-ho that stated he was a police sergeant for the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency. Just like he got that sense of power in high school as class president, punishing the unruly kids, he was going around seedy areas of Seoul and extorting them for money. He targeted illegal businesses, sex workers, and bookies. During this time, he had at least on one occasion hired a sex worker at a motel, pulled out his fake ID pretending to be an undercover cop, handcuffed her, and extorted her for money. It wasn't large sums, it was always something like 100,000 won or $100 each time. He mainly was searching to scratch that itch he had for dominating other people. He wanted control and power. And I think as well he wanted to feel morally superior. He punished wealthy people who lived near churches, both because he thought they were blasphemous, but also because he felt abandoned by the God he once worshipped, the God that he abandoned once he got consequences for his own actions. Abandonment is a really common factor in his life. But after his CCTV screenshot was being shared online, he decided to leave the area and move to Nogosan, which is just a few neighborhoods away from Shinsu where he lived before. In Nogosan, he moved into an office-tel. An office-tel is a step up from a goshewon that he was living in before. Office-tels are a combination of an office and a hotel. They actually originated in Mapo, Seoul, and the purpose of these apartments was to give small office units to people living in the city, people that couldn't afford or didn't want large office spaces for their businesses. But living in an office wasn't legal housing, so they started creating these small apartments that had everything an office needed. It was like a way to get around the law. Nowadays, office-tels are often just compact apartments that normal people live in. Typically, they have this open bedroom area that has a ladder or steep staircase up to it. I haven't lived in either of these. I lived in 2 different villa apartments while in Korea, which are just small apartments in a suburban area. Yoo Youngchul is able to afford this better housing now that he's doing his extortion scam. He's living 2 full lives, one as a police impersonator and the other as a serial killer. There's no form of normalcy in his life. He's not going home and acting like a stand-up guy like Gary Ridgway did. The area he lived in, which has been rebuilt since 2009, was riddled with business rooms, brothels, bars, and it was there that he met Miss Kim, the new love of his life. And it's there that we will stop until next week. We will resume, don't worry, we'll continue Yoo Youngchul's story. I really wish this was the end, but it only continues to get worse. Thank you for joining me on Korean True Crime. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it or leave a review. Check the description for a link to our Discord, Patreon, and to find our new merch. My sources are also free on Patreon. Thank you so much to my patrons. You make this show possible. My patrons have been the most supportive and kind people. They truly give me the drive to keep pushing through the most stressful of times. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.